The Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So nice to see everybody today. Another Tuesday, and summer is now here. This was nice to see. And so I think actually yesterday was the half moon day. So Buddhist countries, they follow a lunar calendar, and also most monasteries follow a lunar calendar. The way that monks regulate their life is through the moon. So you tend to be looking at the moon a lot. And each full moon and each new moon is very special because that's when the monks recite their monastic rules. And then the half moon days also tend to be special days. So traditionally, in those days, you try to devote extra time to meditation practice. And so in a lot of Theravada meditation monasteries around the world, on that same day, or sometimes it differs by like a day depending on the country, because you can calculate it different ways, but monks will tend to stay up and meditate late on those days and kind of try to put in a little extra time. And so when I was in Thailand, the tradition there was that they would stay up all night, kind of. So you kind of go there, and you would meditate and you just keep meditating, and then you'd stay up the whole night. You couldn't kind of sometimes, if you were with your friends, you didn't want to be embarrassed and go wimp out. So you would stay up, and then in the morning time you would have the morning chanting after being up all night, and then you would go on alms round after that. And then after alms round, there was the meal, and so after the meal was when you could sleep. And so in the time of Ajahn Chah, he used to kind of force all the monks in the monastery to do that. Everybody had to stay there for the whole night, and he would sometimes lock the door to the meditation hall. And he himself would come and sit down, just walk in kind of like the monks do, and he would sit down and he would put his legs in a sitting posture, and he would go like this, and he would stay in that position for 8 hours without moving at all. So there was one monk who said he used to kind of watch him to see if he would move, but he didn't move. He kept this kind of sitting posture for that whole time, which obviously is a very inspiring thing to see. And so even today, coming down, having this kind of example, you try to do a little bit of extra practice on these kind of moon days. And so yesterday being the moon day, one of the things like to do is they have these kind of, you have the teachings of the Buddha and the suttas, but then you also have these kind of written and oral teachings from meditation masters, people who've kind of gone very far or completed their practice. Often they have them in a biography form, at least in Thailand, and I think they also have that in the Chinese tradition. It's kind of these biographies of the people who practice, and they're often very, very inspiring. Kind of the things that they've done. They call it prawat in Thai. And so yesterday decided to do a bit of reading on this kind of a book I'd read before, but hadn't read for quite some time, which kind of goes through the modes of practice of the very early days of the Thai forest tradition. Kind of very inspiring. I'm sure it's kind of the same. You read the suttas and hear about the biographies of these early monks, then it's very similar to the way that they live, kind of just wandering throughout the forests, throughout the jungles, and living in caves. And oftentimes the writer who wrote these particular books, he was actually the one who popularized the Thai forest tradition. In Thailand, people didn't know about it for quite some time. But he wrote books about what all these monks were up to, and it became popular. And because of that, we have it today. So, they would have these kind of encounters with various animals. So the one I was reading yesterday was there was a monk. He went to, this is kind of an often repeated story. He went to meditate, and he wanted to go to a particular place, and the villagers in that place said, "Don't go. There's this kind of terrible snake living there, and it bites and kills people." So if you've ever seen these kind of snakes in Asia, these kind of king cobras, they're immense, actually. It's kind of, the thing is like, maybe it's like from here to the to the podium or longer. And it's a cobra, right? So, the cobras have this head, and they kind of go towards you, and then they'll go up like this till their head is like almost level with yours. And it said that when they do that, you have like 3 seconds to live because their venom is so deadly. And so the monks in these stories, this particular monk, there was this black snake that had bitten and killed many people, but he decided he wanted to go meditate in that cave anyway. And so he went there, and this black snake came out, and it raised its hood, and then it became time for me to stop reading, so I put the book down. But in any event, I've read that story before. And from what I remember, he spread metta to the snake, and the snake went away. But one of the things about it was that what you often come across as a pattern in the biographies of these very inspiring monks who finish their practice is that they face a lot of danger in their life as monks. Their life as monk is not kind of like an easy life. It's very difficult. Often they're going through and not getting much food. They're often close to starvation. If you see the photos of some of these monks, they're very thin. So they would take the practices, these Dhutanga practices, where you would eat once a day, only eat alms food. You would wear cast-off robes from corpses or from other cloth that you found. And you would live in the forest at the base of a tree, often with this kind of mosquito net. And so living this way, they encountered all kinds of crazy things, not just animals. Sometimes they would encounter kind of non-human beings. These are the things you read about in the texts, like the suttas. They're stated very matter-of-factly. And I remember coming across these things in the suttas and being like, well, that's good. I've never seen one of those things. And when I first encountered this tradition of these wandering monks, I was very happy that this author had explicitly spelled out all these experiences of these monks, because this still happens to people today. And what you tended to find was whenever these monks came across a dangerous situation, what pulled them through that dangerous situation was faith. It was kind of very interesting. So it was this kind of same talk that they tended to give themselves was, well, if my time is up, then my time is up. There's nothing that anybody can do to avoid their bad kamma. If I've harmed this animal or whatever it is in any way, and it's now my time to face retribution for that harm, then I'll willingly accept that kind of death, But if it's not my time, then no matter how much I think it is my time, then I won't die, irrespective. So they had this kind of very strong faith in kamma, in the laws of kamma, and a very strong faith in their practice. And oftentimes this was what pulled them through to higher levels of their practice. They emphasized this quite a lot. Of course, the Buddha, he said, if you see a wild elephant, avoid it. If you see a wild dog, avoid it. But just going out into these places, oftentimes you can't avoid these things. So there was another story in, similar, and I think it was maybe another book related to these, the Thai forest monks. And there was one monk, the founder of this tradition, his name was Ajahn Mun. And he was basically famous for being a fearless monk. And he would live in these places. At that time, Thailand was very rural, a lot of forests. I think Sri Lanka still has quite a lot. And there were a lot of teeming with animals. The jungle is, it's not like, Colonel Danforth Park. It's like, let's go into some really nice nature. It's kind of scary. Like everything is alive there. And many of the things there are trying to eat you. So he was famous for meditating in terrifying places, especially with tigers. So tigers were this horrifying animal, the scariest animal in the forest. And you could hear them roaring. And so I never actually heard a tiger roar, but when I was living in the country in Canada, you would hear these coyotes, and they're very loud. It's like, whoa, whoa,
and they take up this howl. And if you're camping, you're out, living in the forest. Sometimes monks would leave their huts and go live in the forest, and you would think, geez, they're coming straight for me. Although they could be anywhere, but in your mind, you have this thought, these coyotes are coming to eat me right now. You kind of want to jump out and run. Actually, I remember this one time, I was on my way to the tent where I was going to stay, and I heard these coyotes kind of like between me and the tent. It was kind of very loud, and I thought, I should go back to the kitchen and get a knife. But, I'd read all these stories, and I'm like, no, that's wimpy, I can't do that, I have to face this, So I kind of continued on, and I never met any coyotes. But in any event, this was a kind of teaching technique that this teacher, Ajahn Mun, would often send his students into. And so he would deliberately tell them to go into areas that were infested by tigers, where tigers live. Sometimes he would tell them to go live in a cave that was right next to a cave where they knew that a tiger lived. So there was this one monk, he gave this talk, it's like people who have a stubborn character, who don't easily submit to their teacher and don't like listening to instructions, those people have to take tigers as their character, because a tiger is a much more ferocious teacher, and they're likely to submit and listen to the Dhamma teaching of the tiger, even though they won't listen to the Dhamma teaching of their actual teacher, who's a human. And he was giving this talk, kind of like, very strong, like fiery talk. And this monk who was sitting in the audience came to know, he's talking about me. He's directing this kind of Dhamma teaching towards me. My character is like that. So he went back to his hut, and he got his kind of equipment. The monks have this kind of like umbrella tent, and sometimes they'll have like a kettle. And then, they have this bag. So if anybody's, actually I have one of those bags. So it's like a bag, and in the bag is your bowl, and you put your robes in your bag, usually your sangati, and you'll be wearing your 2 other robes. And then you'll have your razor and what they call the attapirika, the 8 things that a monk should always have. Those are your requisites for life. They carry those in this bag. So he went and got his stuff, and he got very determined. He was walking out of the monastery. His teacher saw him, Ajahn Mun, and he was like, "Where are you going? You look like you're, a warrior about to go into battle." And he's like, well, the other monk was like, well, that talk you gave, that was about me. I know you were giving the talk about me, so I'm going to live in that cave where you said to live, and I'm ready to die. And Ajahn Mun said, well, who told you to go there to die? I thought I was telling people to go there to practice meditation. And then he said, where did you get this tasty flesh that tigers just love so much that they're ready to jump out and eat it? Many other people have practiced meditation there before, and they haven't been eaten. So I'm not sure where you got this extremely tasty, flesh that tigers just can't resist. And so this monk said, he said, I can't remember what he said after that, but he was just kind of laughing that he was getting scolded. And he, anyways, went to this cave where the tiger was. And he did a couple of things while he was there. One of them was, I think there was a precipice near this kind of cave. And he was falling asleep in his meditation. And he thought, okay, well, if that's going to be the way it is, I'll go sit on the edge of this precipice. And if I die falling into the edge of this precipice because I fell asleep, well, that's my problem. I shouldn't have fallen asleep. So he went there and meditated, at the edge of this precipice. And because of this danger of falling over and dying, he didn't fall asleep. And in fact, he was able to stay with his meditation object so much that his mind dropped into what they call a panya samadhi, which is this kind of a state of extreme bliss, where you're not aware of any of your external surroundings. Kind of these different levels to the jhanas. And you can have this complete absorption with these various levels of the jhanas. And so after sitting in that for a while, he came out, and he was still on the edge of the precipice. That was one thing he did. And the second thing he did was, this tiger lived in the cave close by him. And I think he could see when it was going out and coming back, like it would go out to find animals to eat and come back. And he knew the trail by which it went. And so he decided, I'm going to sit in the middle of this tiger's trail. And so he did. he went and sat there and he was meditating maybe for a few hours. These monks are amazing meditators. Their average meditation time was like 5 hours when they would sit to meditate. And so he sat there meditating, and eventually he heard this tiger coming to up the path to where he was. And he gave himself this talk. He's like, well, that's it. If this tiger is going to eat me, it's because of my kamma, that I've done something bad. But if not, then I have to completely rely on the Dhamma. I can't rely on anything else right now. My life is on the line. All I have to rely on is my meditation. This is my only protection, so I have to focus on that. It's kind of just paraphrasing him. He used these kind of very warrior type words. And so with this, he focused in on his meditation object, and he used this image of this tiger jumping and biting the back of his neck to spur him on. And again, he was able to stay with his meditation object very closely, and his mind dropped into this apanya samadhi. That's kind of what they call the base of samadhi. Kind of go drop down there, and it stayed there, I think, until morning. And then he came out of it, and he looked around, and he saw that the tiger's tracks were coming up, coming up, coming up, coming up, and it didn't even deviate. It just kept going into the cave. It didn't pay any attention to them. Of course, this is not something to recommend that people do, but the theme that goes through all of these monks' practices in this tradition was the degree to which they relied on their meditation in times of difficulty. That's one thing. The second thing about it was their perseverance in overcoming whatever difficulty presented itself to them with the Dhamma. That was basically all they used. It was all that they had, really. I mean, they had 8 requisites. They had their body, they had their mind, and they had their umbrella tent. There's basically no shelter from anything. And, easily things can come in and stomp you to death or whatever it is, bite you. But they relied on the Dhamma. And through this, many of them lived to very old ages. Many of them persevered in their practice, and many of them had breakthroughs in their practice that wouldn't otherwise be possible. And so the lesson to take from these things, there's one of them, is that I once had this kind of a Zen teacher who would often say, we're capable of more than you think. We're capable of doing more than you think. Now, this doesn't mean have to go out and sit and meditate on a precipice. Actually, if anybody went to meditate on a Laura Gorge, I would be, if somebody fell in there, I might get sued. So, please don't. But in any event, the teaching that we have there is that basically all the tools that we need to overcome the various problems that arise in our life are right here. Actually, these monks didn't even have the Sutta Pitaka with them in the forest. They just had the meditation, they had their ingenuity, they had the teachings that they had before, and when they were up against the hard place, they didn't give in to the hard place. They didn't give in to whatever the difficulty may be. Because the real lesson there is that the true difficulty that occurred in living in these terrible places, there was hard things, kind of living with tigers or living with ants biting you, living with not much food, but the true difficulty was actually the mind. It was actually what was going on in their minds. This is why the monks would go sit in front of these tigers. The mind would conjure up these images of this tiger biting them, eating them. They would go sit on a precipice. The mind would be terrified. And of course, these are terrifying things. But the thing about it is that it never happened. And this was what went on again and again and again when you read these stories of these monks who had breakthroughs in their practice. It was that they had this thing that was tormenting them, and they wanted to find a solution. And the thing that was tormenting them was often just a perception. That's all it was. But constantly, previously, they'd given way. Constantly, previously, they'd given up to this perception, to this illusion, to this delusion. And oftentimes, that's exactly what suffering is in a person's life. They don't have to be living in the middle of a jungle to experience this kind of suffering. They don't have to be living anywhere to experience this kind of suffering. This kind of suffering comes up all the time and constantly. What if? What if I lose my job? What if my kid doesn't do well in school? What if, my parents are getting old, they get sick? What if, I can't make the mortgage payments? All these things, of course, they're like the tiger. They're a genuine worry, right? We have to take care of it, right? And you don't just stop paying the mortgage or stop being concerned about one's responsibilities. But the other thing about them is that they're an image. See, none of those things has happened. None of those things is true. None of those things is a reality. It's like this kind of image of the monk with the tiger. It's kind of terrified of this tiger. And so long as a person continues being terrified of these things, continues relying on the world to solve these things, they never find the resources within themselves that are the true solution to these things. So people can actually still have these experiences today. It doesn't require, going into the forest, it tends to be easier to do because one has less distractions, but there's always something with everybody. Everybody has something that they are practicing with. Some difficulty that seems insurmountable. Some trouble that they haven't been able to conquer before. So there's this one monk I knew of, or I kind of know very well. Kind of as his meditation practice was progressing, kind of get rid of grosser and grosser levels of defilement, then came to this point where he realized that there was this particular habit that he had. And when things were going well, he didn't like it. Somehow, always engaging in some kind of self-sabotage. Whenever things went well, had to find something that was troublesome. Things were going smoothly, had to find some anxiety. Something would find to make it anxious. Yeah? And as he progressed in his practice, as the grosser forms of defilement that monk had wore away, started to notice this. It was constantly pulling him off for years and years and years. And then one day, he decided, that's it. It kind of came up again. Things were going okay, and it was like, this kind of terrible worry about some terrible thing that monk had to do came up. And decided, that's it. I'm not going to give in. I'm going to meditate for 10 hours a day until this problem is solved. There's no way I'm going to allow myself to be beaten up by this problem again. And in that monk's case, after maybe 3 or 4 days of this kind of battle, when you wake up, it's there. When you go to sleep, it's there. And this delusion is always in the mind. It's never going to end. It will always be there. But kind of a breakthrough came in his meditation practice and kind of realized, wait a minute. This is something, this anxiety may have actually come when I was kind of very, very young. Not like a psychological breakthrough, but a kind of seeing that, what he was actually afraid of was just this normalcy, just things being normal. Now, that's something easy to explain, but when you hear monks tell these various stories, there's usually more to it. In other words, this opened up a new dimension in that monk's practice, kind of like a fish, swimming in the water all the time, and never knowing there's another world. Until one day they peek their head out, and they see there's land. And maybe it becomes a frog, develops some legs, and starts to explore the land. But the amazing thing about these kind of breakthroughs that a person might have in their practice is that they come at the end of a period of perseverance. They come at the end of a period of overcoming difficulty. And what comes with them is insight that genuinely ends defilements. So in that monk's case, it's not like it was a permanent end to his defilements. I don't think he was a stream enter as a result of that experience, but I don't think that particular defilement troubled him. Kind of stopped troubling him. And this is the way that insight works. You can repeat an insight to somebody like, okay, this is X, Y, Z, but for you, it happens when it's something that's been completely troubling you no longer troubles anymore. And there's usually this knowledge that comes with it, like, it's because of this. It's a knowledge that comes with seeing. So it's not something you get from a book. So I remember when I was young, it's kind of a little bit of a banal example. I used to smoke a lot of marijuana for a year. I didn't smoke marijuana for most of high school. And then I think I started smoking marijuana in like grade 11. And then I became addicted to marijuana. And I smoked it for like a year. And I was just always smoking marijuana. Smoked it before I went to bed. I didn't smoke it like at school because I found that I just had to like go home if I couldn't focus after that. But in any event, grade 12 rolled around and I decided, I've had enough of this habit. It was terrible. I can't stand it, But was not able to give it up. It was very difficult to give it up. Eventually I figured out it was actually the cigarette that I was putting in the marijuana that was really addictive, but I never smoked cigarettes. So in any event, it was just constant struggle. I just kind of got to give this up. I'd give it up for 3 weeks and then I would relapse. And I'd give it up for like a month and then I'd relapse. And then I'd give it up for like 2 months and I'd relapse. I was like, I've got to give it up. I'd stop hanging around my friends, try to give it up. And it was just seeming very difficult. And then this one time came where I was like, that's it. I've had enough of being addicted to marijuana. I'm going to sprint down the hill outside of my house every day and then sprint back up every single day. Because this is one of the things when you start smoking, you can't do athletics anymore. Your lungs become very weak. And then if you do athletics and then smoke, it's very painful or it's unpleasant. So I decided that either one was going to go. Either the athletics would go or the marijuana would go. And there was no way I was going to quit. So I kept sprinting up and down this hill, just doing that constantly over and over again. And then the day came where I did this sprint and I gave in and smoked marijuana. And after I smoked that marijuana, I got very sick. It was kind of this lung infection, wouldn't go away. It was because, you're running and your lungs get raw from that. If you keep smoking, you have this like coating of tar that builds up on your lungs and it kind of blocks the other tar. But if you keep running, it keeps getting lifted off. So I got very, very sick. And then by the end of that sickness, I realized, smoking marijuana makes me sick. And after that, marijuana's power fell away from me. I didn't have this kind of desire to smoke marijuana again. I think after that I smoked it one more time and that was it. I was able to quit. But in any event, you repeat that insight to other people, smoking marijuana makes you sick. Yeah, it makes you sick. What do you think it's going to do? But it's very different when an insight comes at the end of a long period of struggle, comes at the end of a determination that you will not give in. Then that insight is accompanied by knowledge. That knowledge is accompanied by the falling away of defilement. And that falling away of defilement brings a real end to suffering in our life. Not a permanent end, but an end to whatever it was that we couldn't get our heads around, that we couldn't stop. And so this is actually often the way that people's practice progresses. It's one of the things, often hear about meditation as relaxing and all these things. It can be, but what it is actually, it's a practice. We're up against habits that have been tormenting us for a long time. So in order to overcome these habits, we have to have faith. It's kind of same faith that these monks had. We have to have faith that there's a solution. We have to have faith that we can find the solution. We have to have faith that the Buddha's teachings are well taught, that they lead to where they're supposed to lead. And with this faith, we have the armor that we need to counter these perceptions. Because it's often these perceptions that prevent us from breaking through to the ending of these defilements, these fears, these worries about what will happen, about how it'll never end. But the amazing thing is, sometimes at the height of those fears, sometimes at the height of these worries, sometimes at the height of these difficulties, if one perseveres in trying to find a solution to their suffering, when it seems like it'll never end, it all breaks away. It all falls off. And this is when insights arise in a person's meditation practice. So the nice thing about these insights is that when one gets them, nobody can take them away. That's a person's personal possession. And it's a possession that's worth more than $1 million maybe, depending what defilements you get rid of. But the potential for them is actually priceless, because this is something that people never forget. They gain confidence that this path leads where it's said to lead. That these defilements that I have are possible to overcome. And this is a confidence that spurs them onwards. Because the Buddha's teachings leads onwards from these things that seem banal. Actually, I was a Buddhist at that time. I became a Buddhist, and it was probably because of the Buddha's teachings I was able to stop smoking marijuana. It seems banal. It starts with things like this, kind of the gross habits that we have. But it progresses to things that we didn't think were even there before. It progresses to eliminating habits we didn't even know we had until all these other ones get worn away and they come into the fore. It progresses to types of happiness we didn't know existed before. In other words, this path is good. It's good in the beginning when we strive to overcome these things with faith and we get knowledge that it's possible. It's good in the middle when we overcome more, when we start to get breakthroughs in our meditation practice. And it's the best in the end because it ends in a permanent happiness. It ends in a happiness that doesn't change. And this is a true reward for people who persevere in their meditation with faith, who overcome their difficulties with perseverance. They gain this knowledge. They gain this knowledge that makes them independent of others in the Buddha's teaching. And at the end, they become even independent of the Buddha himself. Somebody who stands alone, untouched by suffering, whose mind is unshaken by the ways of the world. And that's what we chant at the end, and that's the highest blessing. Okay?